Hi class, welcome back. We are still in week 3 and the third of 3 videos that we're doing for lesson 3.1. Apologies if this seems really long. Brick and mortar classes, regular classroom classes, we're used to 45-minute to 1-hour lectures, but not on online. We don't normally do this. But this topic about nature's design principles is so key to biomimetic design that I really wanted to spend some time sharing this with you at the beginning of the week. And after this and the rest of the course, you won't have to listen to me so much. So this short video is the right-hand side of the Life's Principles Butterflies, which is about life creating conditions conducive to life. So here's our butterfly again. And again, it will be helpful to have this in front of you, or the list if you prefer that, as we're going through this talk. All right, so now we're going to be talking about this part, life creating conditions conducive to life, okay? And remember, we create conditions conducive to life so that we can live with the operating conditions on Earth. So on this side of the butterfly, we have life optimizes rather than maximizes or minimizes. That life is interdependent. It leverages interdependence, and life uses benign manufacturing. And we'll go through each of these. Okay, so here we ask the question again, why do we need to create conditions conducive to life? This one may seem a little bit more obvious than adapting and evolving, but it brings in all 3 operating conditions. Because we're a water-based planet, we have to respect that, and we'll get into that. Again, things are dynamic and in a state of non-equilibrium on the planet. Things are always changing, and so some of these creating conditions conducive to life addresses that. And again, we have to face the fact that we've got limits and boundaries on Earth. All right, the first one, and again, there's no priority. I say first only because it happens to come out on visibly on top of the graphic and on our list, that life optimizes. And what this really means is that it's optimizing rather than minimizing or maximizing. So we know in our human world, in our human technologies, especially in marketing, we're always using superlatives, right? It's the biggest, it's the best, it's the fastest, it's the smallest. So those S words are really about minimizing and maximizing. Nature really can't afford to do that. If you want to create conditions conducive to life, you need to optimize, and not just optimize, but you're optimizing across a system and across a dynamic system. And in fact, a lot of the optimization itself is dynamic. So it's constantly sensing and responding, as we talked about earlier, and then figuring out what's the optimal distribution, optimal balance, optimal size, optimal shape for that condition and for those circumstances at that time. Because of that, you get all kinds of really interesting expressions and strategies in nature. So it can optimize using a couple different sub-principles. One is using multifunctional design. So almost every strategy you find out there has more than one purpose, multifunctional. And I'm guessing you saw some of that last week when you looked at a strategy that performs a function. If you looked again, that same strategy probably performs several other functions. And then life fits form to function. And in design we always talk about fitting form to function. So you create the form based on whatever function it's supposed to perform. But really, usually it's the other way around. We come up with a function, we come up with a form first because we like that form visually, and then we kind of figure out how to make it functional, right? Nature can't afford to do that. So all the forms you see in nature, all these gorgeous, beautiful, creative forms you see out there are all based on function. This anteater here makes it super obvious. Clearly his nose is designed, that form is to fit the function of being able to access ants in an anthill. Now you don't always end up with the same forms for the same function. You look at these 2 rabbits here. This guy has really long ears and this guy has unusually short ears, and yet they're both rabbits or hares of some sort. So that's because they have multiple function and they're optimizing across all of those functions. So for example, we know that ears are for hearing, right? And if an engineer were to make a hearing device, it would be all about hearing, because it's only performing one function. But the ears perform several functions for these rabbits, one of which is also helping with temperature regulation. So in a hot climate, the ears are really long because those are cooling devices too. The blood's running through there, and as a breeze goes past, it provides a cooling function. So it needs to be the right size for cooling as well as the right size and shape for hearing. Now, if you have really big ears, of course, there's expensive in making those, but also depending on where you're hopping about. If you're in open grass, big ears won't get in the way, but if you're hopping underneath bushes all the time, big ears would get in the way. Also, these ears move around, right? So if you have a dog or a cat, you've seen how their ears can be quite expressive. Same thing with these rabbits. So the ears move in different directions, not only so they can hear better, but that also signals to other animals what they're sensing, so they can respond. So again, that ties into the sense and respond, right? So that's both multifunctional design and fitting form to function. So you see how that's working out. Another example is these. You see spirals all over nature. I mean, virtually everything in nature has that Fibonacci series in there, either as a spiral or in the branching pattern. And some of you in design and in fine arts would know this from the golden ratio, that perfect rectangle. It's exactly the same geometry that goes into the spiral and branching pattern. So in fact, here you've got spirals going one way and spirals going the other way, and actually the ratio of the number of spirals one way is it follows a Fibonacci series in the number going the other way. And the reason for that, as we talked about last time, is it allows for infinite proportional growth, and it has this optimal packing size. So again, it's multifunctional and fitting form to function. This is another example, seeds here. Now this is green, so it's also photosynthesizing. It has these little wings on there so that when it breaks off, the wind can blow it, and it, as you've all seen, it spins as it floats down, so it can travel farther away from the tree than if it fell straight down. That allows the right sort of distribution for those seeds. So you have all kinds of crazy functionality in here that you see as strategies that are, I want you to be looking for multi-functionality, so you're optimizing across several functions and why that form fits that particular function, okay? And I'll let you explore these sort of things when you're doing your explorations for your designs and also at your BCI sessions. Okay, the next one is that life is interconnected and interdependent. So we talked about systems already, but again, life is, nature is all about systems. It's systems within systems, and they're dynamic systems. So nothing is really truly independent. Everything is interconnected and interdependent. So we talked about this in this wetland scene before, how everything is being cycled and recycled. And life is, so you can imagine that going on in here. We know that with, whether it's, we used to call it food chains, but it's really like a food web, right? So whether it's nutrient cycling or material cycling or the actual critters themselves in a food web, everything is interconnected and interdependent. This means that all materials, energy, nutrients are constantly being cycled and recycled within the community. Now we're talking about the biotic world, the living things here, but of course the abiotic world, the water, the sediments, the atmosphere are all a part of that. Life is self-organizing. So what that means is, again, this is part of fitting form to function. So the bird here is getting probably bugs out of the nose of this cow. So it the ecosystem organizes itself by each thing finding an opportunity with the other and having this value exchange going on. So we talk about networking and people know, oh, we got to form networks, but you don't form a network and then decide what to do with it. The network forms because of added value by making yet another connection within or to a network. And that's what self-organizing is about. It's about fitting form to function. So there's always a set of functions going on every time you make this interconnection and interdependence. This is another example of recycling everything. So Even when something is dead, it provides a new life to, in this case, these mushrooms, which are the decomposers in an ecosystem. So in an ecosystem, you've got all these roles going on, and all those niches are filled by someone doing something. We've got primary production, we've got decomposers, and, predators. So we've got the whole system going on in this interconnection and interdependent. One thing that's important to notice is you can get too dependent. So when an ecosystem becomes really mature, like you think of like a mature forest, if you've got very few, very big old trees, you can actually become too dependent, and that can become brittle. And what that means is it's less resilient, which we talked about last time, and it's more, when you do get a disturbance, it can't recover. Our economic system is brittle with respect to petroleum, for example. So virtually every aspect of our economy depends on petroleum. So we are too dependent on petroleum. So we're highly interconnected, but we're too dependent, and that's not a good thing. And so we should be breaking that down a bit, which is going to happen at some point, whether we like it or not, in a good way or bad way. And nature has a way of constantly breaking things down, releasing them, and allowing new systems to take place. Okay, so that's another way to create conditions conducive to life. And I guess I forgot to mention, the reason I highlighted life in green is when we're talking about life, we're not talking about the life of an individual organism or even a whole species. We're talking about life with a capital L, in the big picture, so life in general, okay? So all life on Earth. So something is always individual life, and individual species create conditions conducive to the collective life of on Earth. Okay, so the third strategy is life uses benign manufacturing. So when nature makes or manufactures things, it's never harmful to the manufacturer or its local environment. The quote we like to use is, birds don't follow their own nest, right? Sorry about that. So in the abalone, this is an abalone shell here, it's got an incredibly hard shell, right? And if when we make something like that, it's like a ceramic. We use heat, beat, and treat, right? So we use a huge amount of heat, thermal energy, in order to heat the ceramic to achieve the properties we want. Beat means we mix it, we churn it, we knead it, we add mechanical energy in order to get the properties that we want. And finally, treat means we treat it with chemicals in order to achieve the properties that we want. You know, we think of ceramics as being relatively benign, but hardly, you know, if you think about heat, beat, and treat. Now, the abalone makes a material much stronger than the ceramics that we make, and yet it does it at ambient temperatures, chilly waters down in the sea, using only locally available and abundant materials, and it does so with its own body using a process of self-assembly. So it does is it secretes this protein network, and then as seawater floats by, bits of calcium carbonate get stuck to that, and it makes this layer. And it does that repeatedly. This layer of hard and soft materials, actually it's soft and pliable materials, calcium carbonate is like chalk, so it's soft, forms this incredibly tough material. So if it has an impact on it, the energy is distributed among these layers, and cracks don't go all the way through. So it uses life-friendly materials, it's done in water, it's all water-based chemistry, and uses the process of self-assembly. So this one really is the one that gets at that we're a water-based planet, right? So all your chemistry should be water-based. Another one here, we've got all this gorgeous color. Feathers are also waterproof. And you think about the way we make gorgeous colors and we make waterproof fabrics, it's very full of toxic materials, right? Nature has figured out how to create colors and waterproof materials using life-friendly materials, using water as a solvent, and using self-assembly. What are the keys to how to do this? Okay, this uses structural colors, so it's not even using a dye. But one of the keys is, if you look at the table of periodic elements, you got all those elements in there, and what humans tend to do is, if we want to have a new function, we come up with even more exotic chemistry using more of the periodic table. Well, nature uses very few elements of the periodic table. We talked about that earlier. We got 4 elements make up 99% of all the biomass on Earth: carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen. Of course, petroleum is made of those things, so it's not just because you use those, that's appropriate. But if we limited ourselves to the molecules and the combinations that we see in nature, we would go a really, really long way to benign manufacturing and sustainable design. So that's something else you can think about. Okay, so that's that side of the butterfly. And again, I want you to keep in mind as you're going through life's principles, relentlessly ask yourself why. Why, for example, do we use shape rather than material? Well, that's because we can be resourceful and opportunistic. Why do we want to be resourceful and opportunistic? So we can be locally attuned and responsive. Well, why is that? So we can adapt and evolve. And why is that? Is because we have to live, perform all the functions we need to live within the operating conditions we find on Earth, okay? So you're going to get really good at asking questions as you become a biomimetic designer. Okay, so after this, and the rest of lesson 3.1, you're going to read something by Jeremy Faludi. Some of you have had a class by him. He is just fantastic. He's got a piece you're going to read called Biomimicry for Green Design. He does a lot of writing for worldchanging.com, so you'll read from there. You're going to explore Ask Nature and look at examples of life's principles in there. And then you're going to read a little bit about what I'm calling nature's principles. This is BCI, my company's adaptation of biomimicry's life's principles, but applied to business organizational structures and practices. So life's principles are really good for the design of things and processes, and you can adapt them to make it more appropriate for business structures and organizations. You can explore that, and then you're going to go out and find 3 products, existing products out there that clearly and cleverly reflect 3 different life's principles, and that's your assignment 3.1. I do not want you to come up with products or look for products that are already clearly biomimetic designs like Velcro. Okay, so no Velcro examples. I want you to take ordinary products and then figure out why they do reflect some of life's principles. Okay, that is it for this long series of lectures for lesson 3.1, and I will see you in lesson 3.2.